Welcome back to the program. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the genocide in Rwanda. The ethnic conflict between the Hutus and Tutsis claimed the lives of more than 800,000 Rwandans, mostly Tutsis. That's almost three-quarters of the Tutsi population. But 20 years later, Rwanda has become an economic model for East Africa, growing at an average rate of 8% for the past 4 years. However, Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda, has been criticized for killing thousands of Hutus in revenge since he rose to power in 2000. He also received criticism after hinting he could extend his rule beyond 2017, which would require changing the constitution. Joining us to talk about Rwanda's violent past and its transformation is Paul Rusesabagina, who saved over 1,200 Rwandan citizens during the country's genocide. His story inspired the Oscar-nominated film Hotel Rwanda. Paul, welcome to the program. It's been 20 years since the genocide, another sad anniversary. What are your feelings as this event is marked 20 years later?
Well, 20 years later, my feelings are mixed. First of all, 20 years later, Rwanda has succeeded to build a very beautiful capital city of Kigali. 20 years later, you can see that in Rwanda, within the country, there is a kind of relative peace. But however, 20 years later, there is another sad story of many innocent people who have been killed. I remember in 1994-95, I was in Rwanda. I witnessed a displaced camp being destroyed by machine guns on the ground and helicopter bombardment in the air. We have witnessed what has been going on in the neighboring Congo since 1996 because a group of people, especially from Rwanda, attacked this country, the Rwandan New Army, because of minerals. And since then to date, we have had more than 7 million victims, more than 300,000 Rwandan refugees from the Hutu side have been killed, all of them because of what they are, because they were Hutus. And this has been documented by the UN mapping report. 20 years later, many proxy militias have been entertained in the neighboring Congo. And all of those militias, the last one in name was M23, which was kicked out by the UN, the MONUSCO, the UN army a few months ago. So 20 years later, we see people who even fled the country, went to exile, being followed into exile. This was the case in the United Kingdom. This was the case in Sweden. We saw this happening in South Africa when many refugees they have attempted to kill them. One of them is General Kayumba. Another one was assassinated at the New Year's Eve this year. So 20 years later, we see that all of those people who advocate for human rights, for our rights, of political rights, all of those who advocate for media freedom, all of those who advocate, who speak for the voiceless, are put in prison.
Okay.
Yeah.
Paul, let's go back 20 years to the time of the genocide. You did some very courageous things at that time, and as I mentioned at the outset, that was immortalized in the movie Hotel Rwanda. Take us through that period and how you managed to muster that courage to save so many people.
Well, actually, to do what I did in 1994, no one had to be a special human being. In 1994, I kept my job as a hotel manager. I did what I could do, the best I could do it, negotiated, dealt, and always came up with the agreements. The agreement was to save lives, and you could go south or north. You could go east and west. The message was the same. It was to save the maximum of lives, and only through words. And this is what I did only.
What do you make of the fact that Western nations, or for that matter, African nations, as well as other nations around the world, did so little to stop the genocide?
Actually, not only the African nations would have stopped the genocide, but also the United Nations were supposed to get involved. And of course, after the peace agreement, because this is what people do not know, actually the Rwandan genocide took place during a civil war which had been going on for 4 years, and a peace agreement was negotiated and signed between the then Hutu government and the then Tutsi rebels. So the international community, the United Nations, had soldiers. They had 2,500 UN soldiers who had come to keep peace. This is what we had in mind. But we never knew that their mission was not to make peace, their mission was not to keep peace, but their mission rather was to come, stand there, observe, and at the end of the whole process, just at the end of the day, draft a cable, send it to New York, and say, okay, well, we have seen those guys, they have butchered each other. They killed 1,000, or we saw 10,000 people being killed. That was the mission.
You said at the beginning of the interview that you had very mixed feelings when you look at what has happened in Rwanda over the past 20 years. So how do you see the future unfold?
I think the only better future for Rwanda and the region would be to silence guns at once, to silence guns and give a chance to words. By dialogue, we then find a lasting peace. That is the only way to a lasting peace. And we cannot reach this unless the international community gets involved, as it has been involved in many other issues.
Okay, Paul, we're going to have to leave it there. Paul Rusesabagina, thanks for joining us.